The weathered journal lay open on Professor Elelanina Webb's desk, its cracked leather spine breathing out a faint scent of dust and candle smoke. The yellowed pages whispered of something that should not be possible. In the spring of 1847, the entire Blackwood family, 17 souls in all, vanished from their prosperous Virginia homestead without warning. No bodies, no signs of struggle. Only an abandoned breakfast plates still warm and a single cryptic line inked into the margin of the family Bible, "They have found us again." Nearly 2 centuries later, laboratory results carried a revelation colder than any ghost story. DNA samples from distant descendants, people scattered across 6 full generations, showed a 95% genetic match. Not merely similar, but nearly identical, as though time itself had refused to dilute their blood. As though these men and women separated by lifetimes were somehow the same. Professor Webb ran a careful finger along the faded ink of the journal, tracing each loop and flourish while the night hummed quietly around her. What secret could bind a family so tightly that even the laws of heredity bent to its will? And if such a thing were possible, who or what had found them? The pages carried her back to that unsettling spring of 1847. Morning light filtered through the tall windows of the Blackwood homestead, catching motes of dust that floated like tiny planets above the handcrafted oak dining table. Thomas Blackwood stood at the head, tall and broad-shouldered, his hair streaked with premature silver. His weathered hands rested gently upon the family Bible. Beside him, Catherine watched with a steady, knowing gaze as her husband traced his finger beneath their names, stopping at the strange symbols etched beside each one. "The children are ready," Catherine said, her voice calm despite the heavy air in the room. "Even little Mary understands as much as her 6 years allow." Thomas closed the Bible with deliberate reverence. "Then we proceed as planned." Outside the homestead rose like a quiet fortress against the dense virgin forest. 10 acres of cleared land, a 2-story home built of timber and stone. A barn where 2 horses and 3 milk cows waited patiently for morning. To a passing traveler, though few ever passed this way, the Blackwoods might have seemed no different from any other pioneering family carving a future from wilderness. But those who looked closely sensed something else. In only 5 years, Thomas Blackwood had accomplished feats that bordered on the miraculous. No ordinary settler kept books in 7 languages or owned astronomical instruments that rivaled the finest university observatories. And certainly no ordinary family maintained a locked basement laboratory that hummed day and night with faint, unearthly energy. The lights were seen again. Last night, reported Jacob the eldest at 17 as he stepped in from his morning chores. Brighter than before, pulsing in sequence. "Exactly as you predicted, Father." Thomas's expression did not change, but his knuckles whitened around his coffee cup. "Then our window approaches faster than calculated," he said quietly. "We must accelerate our preparations." In the nearby town, people spoke of the Blackwoods in guarded tones. Some called Thomas a gentleman scientist dabbling in agricultural experiments. Others whispered of witchcraft, pointing to the strange auroras that sometimes shimmered above the family's land, silent curtains of green and violet that appeared without warning. Their rare visits to purchase supplies always stirred curiosity. 8 children each with the same uncanny eyes that seemed to shift from blue to amber, depending on the light, walked through the streets in perfect stillness. "They don't belong here," old Mrs. Abernathy would mutter whenever they passed. Something unnatural about those children. Too quiet. Too knowing. If the Blackwoods ever heard these rumors, they gave no sign. They moved with efficient purpose, speaking only when required, declining all invitations to Sunday services or community gatherings. And always, they returned to their remote clearing before dusk. Down in the hidden laboratory, Thomas descended the narrow wooden stairs while the world above settled into evening. Glass vessels bubbled with liquids of impossible colors. Specimens meticulously labeled lined the walls. Rocks that glowed without heat. Plants with properties unknown to any botanical text. And a single jar containing what looked like liquid amber. Within that golden suspension, something faintly alive seemed to pulse, as if keeping time with a heartbeat beyond the senses. "It's calling to them," Catherine said softly, appearing at his side without a sound. "I feel it too," Thomas replied, eyes fixed on the jar. The barrier thins. The calculations are correct. It was never random. They have been watching across dimensions, tracking the bloodline. As if answering his words, the amber substance brightened and began to pulse more rapidly. That night, as darkness deepened over the virgin forest, the family gathered in the main room. Catherine ladled a hearty stew into waiting bowls, while Thomas made careful notations in his journal, the quill scratching steadily against the paper. Outside, the wind stirred the pines, carrying faint flashes of colored light through the branches. What were the Blackwoods preparing for in those final hours? What force could draw 17 people, parents and children alike, toward a decision so absolute that they left no trace behind? And if the bloodline truly defies time, might some echo of that decision still linger, waiting for the right night to return, for the right? Professor Webb closed the journal and sat very still. The room around her seemed to breathe. Somewhere in the quiet hum of the modern city, perhaps a descendant of the Blackwoods walked unaware, carrying in their veins a riddle that no science has yet untangled. And as you drift into the edge of sleep, you might wonder, as she did, if they have found them once, who is to say they will not find them again? The children sat around the heavy oak table, their ages stretching from 6 to 17. They spoke in soft voices, a gentle weave of conversation, broken only by the occasional glance, each look carrying a quiet understanding. To a casual observer, it might have seemed like any family enjoying a calm evening meal. Yet there was something different. Every movement, every passing of bread or lifting of a spoon followed a rhythm too perfect, as if they shared a silent choreography older than words. "Will it hurt?" asked Mary, the youngest, her small voice steady and unafraid. Thomas Blackwood set down his pen and looked into her eyes. His expression softened by something both tender and resolute. "No, little one," he said gently. "It will feel like stepping through a doorway, a momentary disorientation, nothing more. And we will stay together." William, 10 years old, absent-mindedly traced the same strange symbol that had been etched beside their names in the family Bible. "That is my promise." Thomas continued, his tone carrying the weight of scientific certainty. "Though we may scatter like seeds in the wind, our essence will remain connected. The bloodline ensures it." Night deepened beyond the windows. Upstairs, as the children prepared for bed, Thomas made one final entry in his journal. His careful hand scratched across the paper. "They have found us again. Tomorrow we make our passage. May those who come after understand what we have done to protect them. The cycle continues. The next morning, the house stood silent. Breakfast sat uneaten on the table, steam long since cooled. The Blackwood family, 17 souls, were gone. No signs of struggle, no belongings taken. Only empty rooms still warm with their lingering presence. And in the family Bible, that same cryptic line, "They have found us again." Professor Elelanena Webb squinted at the DNA test results spread across her university desk. The fluorescent lab lights humming softly overhead. She had checked the figures 3 times already, but the numbers refused to change. "It's not possible," murmured Dr. Marcus Chen, adjusting his glasses as he leaned over her shoulder. 95% genetic similarity across 6 generations. The statistical probability is 0, biologically impossible. Elelanena finished for him, her voice barely above a whisper. Even identical twins show more variation over time. Environment random mutations, something always changes. She tapped the printouts with a trembling finger. But these profiles? They do not. The results had arrived that very morning. Comprehensive genetic data from 12 living people who had recently discovered their shared ancestry through an online database. Each descended from a different branch of the same family that had supposedly disappeared in 1847. By all logic, their genetic markers should have diluted to less than 10%. Yet here they were nearly identical. Someone tampered with the samples, Marcus suggested, though his tone lacked conviction. "No," Elelanena replied. The tests were run independently at 3 separate labs. And look here, she pointed to a highlighted section on the page. "This sequence doesn't match anything in existing genetic databases. It's something else." A sudden knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal a woman with auburn hair and eyes of a startling hue, blue, shot through with amber, shifting subtly with the light. Beside her stood a tall man wearing the same impossible gaze. "Professor Webb?" the woman asked softly. "I'm Sarah Blackwood. We spoke on the phone. This is my cousin James." Elelanena recognized them immediately from the photographs attached to their ancestry profiles, 2 of the 12 descendants with the impossible DNA. James stepped forward, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his palm unusually warm. "Technically," he added, with a faint smile, "we're 5th cousins, twice removed. I'm a cardiovascular surgeon in Boston. When Sarah told me about your findings, I had to see them for myself." Sarah placed a worn leather journal on the desk. Its surface bore the same weathered texture as the original Blackwood records. "This belonged to my great-great-grandmother," she said. "There are references to the others and dreams of home that never made sense until now." As Elelanena reached for the journal, the overhead lights flickered, a subtle tremor running through the room. "That happens around us sometimes," Sarah murmured. "Electronic disturbances, power fluctuations. James experiences it too." Marcus looked up from his computer screen, his face pale with thought. "I've been mapping the geographical distribution of all 12 descendants," he said slowly. "Despite having no contact for generations, none of you settled more than 500 miles from the original homestead." "There's more," James added. "We all share a blood anomaly, an unknown protein that makes standard transfusions impossible." In the dreams, Elelanena prompted, remembering their earlier phone call. "You mentioned dreams." Sarah's eyes darkened, the shifting blue-amber deepening. like storm clouds over water. We dream of people we've never met, places we've never been, a family dinner in a wooden house, children playing by a stream. But most disturbing, her voice trailed off as if the words themselves carried danger. We dream of being watched, through windows that aren't windows at all, but tears. Tears in reality. The door opened again before anyone could speak. A slender woman with short black hair entered her arms, full of electronic equipment. "Sorry I'm late," she said, her breath quick from travel. "Airport security had questions about my devices." She gave a brief nod toward the others. "I'm Eliza Blackwood, physicist at MIT. When Sarah found me through the Ancestry site, I ran my own tests." Setting down a tablet, she tapped the screen to display a series of shimmering waveform patterns. "Each of us emits a unique electromagnetic signature," she explained. "Except it isn't unique. Every single one of us shares the exact same pattern, identical frequencies, which should be as impossible as our genetic match." Elena felt a cold ripple slide through the warm room. "You all found each other just 3 months ago," she said quietly. "And now, there are 12 of you. 13 as of yesterday," Eliza corrected. "A graduate student in Chicago just discovered his connection. He's flying in tomorrow." Marcus cleared his throat, eyes fixed on the glowing data. "I've been researching the historical records," he began, but his voice faltered as if the words themselves might awaken something best left sleeping. Outside, the night pressed against the windows. Somewhere beyond the reach of science, the cycle that Thomas Blackwood had written off so long ago seemed to stir once more. "The original homestead still exists," Marcus said at last, breaking the heavy silence. "It's been preserved as a historical site in rural Pennsylvania." Sarah exhaled slowly, her voice almost a whisper. "If we want answers, we need to go there." "Where it all began?" James murmured, nodding toward the scattered DNA reports. His amber blue eyes caught the lab light, reflecting something deeper than simple curiosity. "But how," Marcus asked, "can we be so genetically similar across generations?" "It makes no sense." It's as if Eliza's quiet voice cut through the room, as if we're the same people. Fragmented across time, but genetically continuous. The words settled over them like a slow falling fog. No one spoke. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to hesitate. "There's something else," Sarah said at last, her tone fragile as if the thought itself carried weight. "Before any of us found each other, each of us independently had the same idea. What if the Blackwood family didn't disappear in 1847? What if they were running? And what if, by finding each other now, we've made ourselves visible to whatever was hunting them?" The lights flickered once, twice, and then went dark. For a breathless moment, the room drowned in silence. When the glow returned, 5 pairs of eyes were locked on the impossible numbers spread across the table. The truth etched in cold, scientific notation. The floorboards creaked softly beneath Professor Elena Webb's shoes as she followed the caretaker through the restored Blackwood homestead. Afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating lazy swirls of dust that danced in the golden air. Behind her, Sarah, James, Eliza, and Marcus moved in a quiet line. Their steps carried an eerie familiarity, as though they had walked these halls long ago in another life. Most everything's been restored to period accuracy. The elderly caretaker explained his keys, jangling like distant chimes. We had to guess at some details. Most of the furnishings were long gone. No one ever discovered what truly happened to them. Not even a clue, Elena asked, running her fingertips across the grain of the great oak dining table. The surface felt alive beneath her hand, warm, almost pulsing. The caretaker shook his head. Some say they were killed by natives. Others claim they fled west. Peculiar thing was, they left food on the table as if interrupted mid-meal. James lingered near the hearth, his gaze fixed on the worn stones. "There's something beneath us," he murmured, not to anyone in particular. "Something important?" Sarah asked. The caretaker frowned. "Well, there is a root cellar, though it isn't part of the tour." "May we see it?" Sarah's eyes flicked toward a particular floorboard in the corner, a directionless pull guiding her. After a hesitant pause, the caretaker sighed and nodded. Minutes later, they descended a narrow wooden stair into a cool earthen cellar. The air smelled of damp soil and age. The caretaker's flashlight swept across rows of dusty jars and hanging farm tools. "The Historical Society restored this too," he said. "Found it filled with dirt when they excavated back in the 50s. Strangest thing was, he stopped mid-sentence as James stepped away from the group, moving straight toward the far wall with unerring certainty. "There's another room behind here," James said, his palm pressing flat against the stone. The caretaker blinked. "That's solid foundation, son." Eliza approached a small handheld device glowing in her grasp. "Not according to this." She tilted the screen to reveal a flickering thermal image. "There's a temperature differential, a cavity beyond this wall." After careful persuasion and a rather generous donation to the Historical Society, the caretaker reluctantly allowed them to investigate. Marcus knelt to examine the stonework, his fingers brushing across irregular seams. At last, he found a recessed mechanism, 3 stones that, when pressed in precise sequence, released a low grinding rumble. A section of the wall shifted inward. "Impossible," the caretaker whispered. 60 years of restoration, and nobody ever found this. Beyond the opening lay a chamber untouched by time. Their flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing a laboratory frozen in the year 1847. Glass vessels rested beneath layers of dust. Brass instruments gleamed faintly in the narrow beams, and leather-bound journals lined perfectly preserved shelves. At the center stood a massive work table etched with intricate diagrams, astronomical alignments, looping mathematical formulas, and symbols no one could name. Eliza stepped forward, breath catching in her throat as she traced the carved equations with trembling fingers. "These," she whispered, eyes widening. "These describe quantum entanglement and dimensional permeability. This is theoretical physics centuries ahead of its time." Marcus carefully opened one of the journals, its pages filled with the precise, elegant handwriting of Thomas Blackwood. He began to read aloud, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "The barrier between worlds grows thinner with each passing cycle." The words lingered in the still air, heavy as the earth itself. Somewhere perhaps, just beyond the reach of sight, the cycle that Thomas had recorded so carefully continued to turn, waiting for the next passage, the next gathering, the next silent disappearance. Imagine sitting in a quiet room with only the ticking of a clock and your own breathing. Tonight's story begins with a frequency, a vibration that is hard to name, Today's resonance measurements confirm my hypothesis. Eleanor's voice rang out softly, almost like a breath. They can trace bloodlines across the boundaries of space and dimension. In front of him, in a glass case, with a slight mist of moisture, lay a strange piece of rock that seemed to come from another world. It looked like a meteorite, but apparently it was more than that. The notes of Thomas, who had touched the rock nearly 2 centuries earlier, contained concepts that humanity had not dared to name until the 20th century. Have you ever wondered how one could understand something that had never been discovered? Sarah stood frozen, her eyes closed, as if hearing something only she could perceive. "I've been here before," she whispered, her voice trembling like a thread. "In my dreams." Thomas stood right here working all night while the children slept above. James opened the wooden box on the table. Inside, small glass tubes filled with dried blood, each one bearing the name of a member of the Blackwood family. "There's something special about this blood," he said softly, almost afraid of his own voice. "It's not a disease. It's a sign. A sign." "For what?" Elelanina asked softly. Eliza picked up a yellowed page from the diary. It showed a human body, but only half of it was present in this world. The other half seemed to have melted into another dimension. For those who can feel and cross the boundaries between dimensions, Eliza answered, her eyes touching a secret too great to name. Marcus quickly scanned each page of the diary, each symbol into his computer. He stopped at a passage about a strange artifact, something Thomas said he had taken from a local tribe. And it was this that had caught the attention of the collectors. "Collectors," Elelanena frowned. "Thomas calls it? What's hunting them?" Sarah said softly, her eyes still closed. "Entities that don't belong to this world, that harvest special bloodlines." James suddenly clutched his head, his face contorting. "Did you hear that? That high-pitched metallic sound?" The room fell silent. And then, as if from the farthest reaches of the room, a rhythmic hum sounded faintly coming from the wall itself. "That's a warning." Sarah opened her eyes, her gaze sharp as a knife. "They're scanning. For us." At that moment, the light on Eliza's device flickered to life and then went out. An electromagnetic pulse. She panicked. "Strong enough to burn out all my circuitry. We have to leave now," James said firmly, already heading for the secret door. As they gathered up the diaries and the vials of blood, Elelanina noticed a strange symbol that kept appearing in Thomas's notes. A spiral that seemed to coil in on itself, seemingly defying all geometry. "The symbol of the tribe," she whispered. "We need to know where Thomas got that artifact." The murmur grew louder as they climbed the basement stairs. The air around them seemed to vibrate with an invisible energy. Whatever had been watching the Blackwoods for centuries just found their descendants. The morning was hazy, and Elelanina's SUV turned onto the dirt road that led to the Lapilands. Dawn stretched across the hills, painting the sky a somber orange-purple. Beside her, Marcus looked down at the digitized journals on the screen. "Thomas Blackwood once met an elder named Walking Crow," Marcus explained. "He seemed to recognize something in his blood that matched their ancient stories." Sarah sat in the back seat, touching the ceremonial mask on her lap, a wooden face with swirls that matched the symbols in Thomas's journal. They had found the mask in the Historical Society's archives, an anonymous donation from the 1920s. These patterns move when you're not looking directly at them, Sarah whispered, as if they're sliding through multiple states at once. James drove silently, his hands gripping the wheel. His headaches, since entering the secret lab 3 days ago, had only intensified. Eliza stayed at the hotel trying to restore the equipment after the mysterious electrical shock. The tribal cultural center slowly emerged from the mist, a modern structure mixed with traditional details. An older man stood waiting on the stone steps as if he had known they were coming. "I am Joseph Riverwind," he introduced, his voice deep and steady. "Grandson of Singing Waters, great-grandson of Walking Crow. I sensed the old blood in you. Sensed you even before the call yesterday." In the pine-scented room, Joseph lifted the mask with trembling but respectful hands. This used to belong to the sleepwalkers, those who could walk between the waking world and the spirit world. It has been missing for generations. Thomas Blackwood took it in the 1840s, Elena explained. Joseph nodded, his eyes distant. "The white scientist who married the girl with the starry eyes. We still remember that story." "Starry eyes?" Marcus asked. "Eyes that change color like the evening sky," Joseph said softly. "The sign of those who are not quite of one world." His gaze fell on Sarah and James, their eyes gleaming strangely. Sarah held her breath, then asked, "What do you know about collectors?" A shadow flickered in Joseph's eyes. "We call them the hungry, ancient beings who live between dimensions. They hunt for special bloodlines, families that can sense and cross the boundary of reality." He opened a locker and carefully removed a roll of time-stained parchment. As it rolled out, the drawings emerged figures running away, surrounded by shadowy entities with too many limbs. "Our ancestors encountered them long before Europeans set foot on this land," Joseph said softly. "They discovered that certain bloodlines attracted these creatures, families whose generations dreamed the same dream and sometimes, by mere thought, could touch the physical world." James fell silent, murmuring, "Like the Blackwoods." Joseph nodded slowly. There was a prophecy about a family that could bend time, creating a bloodline that could exist in multiple generations at once. A bloodline that, if harvested in its entirety by the hungry ones, would have permanent access to our world. Have you ever thought that blood could be the key that opens doors that history and physics have never named? Elena was stunned by concepts that defied all scientific principles. All the data they had gathered made any conventional explanation seem impossible. "Why did your people avoid the Blackwoods?" Marcus asked quietly. "Because it sits on a thin point, a region where the boundaries between the natural worlds weaken." Joseph answered, tracing the spiral pattern on the mask with his aged hand. "We never built villages there, not since before the arrival of the Europeans." He pointed to the symbols carved into the mask. "This is an amulet to obscure the vision of the hungry." As soon as he spoke, all the digital watches on their wrists stopped. The ceiling lights flickered and the air was thick with static. "They're scanning," Joseph said, his voice calm. "They sensed the awakening when you found the lab. When enough bloodlines gathered, they sent out a signal, a beacon that penetrated all dimensions." Sarah gasped, clutching her temple. "Something is watching us." A window but it doesn't exist. Joseph moved with surprising speed for his age, taking a leather pouch from a small wooden cabinet. He sprinkled the powder in a circle around them, humming the old chant. The thick air softened. The static dissipated, and Sarah's breathing steadied. It's only temporary protection, Joseph warned. This mask is the most powerful spell. It can hide the wearer from their sight, even allowing for brief steps into their world without being detected. But who would want to go to that world? James asked, his voice choking. To understand how to defeat them, Joseph replied. And that's exactly what I believe Thomas Blackwood tried to do. The question is, did he succeed, or did he just postpone the inevitable? Marcus sat in front of the screen, rubbing his tired eyes as the genetic sequence continued to scroll. 3 days without sleep, all leading up to this moment. Next to the computer in a sealed storage compartment, the amber locket they'd found in Thomas's diary glowed with a quiet light, as if it had a soul of its own. Elela Nena, you need to see this, Marcus called softly. The makeshift university room looked like a battlefield, a cot against the wall boxes of food strewn across the table. Elela Nena woke up slowly, her eyes still misty with sleep. What time is it? 4 in the morning, Marcus replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. I've isolated an anomaly in the Blackwood family's genetic makeup. She stepped forward, watching the 3-dimensional DNA model slowly rotate on the screen. It can't be, she whispered. I thought so too, Marcus said. But look at this signature. It doesn't match any known human genetic sequence. Almost. He paused, swallowing. Almost what she asked. Almost like this DNA exists in a quantum superposition. It can exist in multiple forms at once. Elela Nena shook her head, her heart protesting the thought. Are you saying their genetic makeup is partially outside of space-time? You're saying, Marcus said slowly, that what we're seeing might be quantum echoes of the original family, fragments that bounce across moments of time. The door to the lab suddenly swung open. James rushed in, helping Sarah, her face pale as if she had just emerged from a strange dream. It's happening again, James said urgently, setting her down on a chair. This time, stronger. Sarah's eyes were glassy, her hands shaking. It's her, she whispered. Catherine Blackwood. I sensed her thoughts, saw them through her eyes. The children were scared. Thomas was in the lab, trying to finish something, before they got there. Eliza came in after her, clutching the newly repaired device. Her brainwaves are strange. During these episodes, they shift to frequencies only seen in the deepest states of meditation. Marcus quickly explained his findings, trying to use the simplest language possible. But even James, despite his medical background, had trouble understanding. So, we're not just descendants, James said slowly. We're pieces of them scattered throughout time. That explains the absurd genetic similarity. Elela Nena sighed. You don't inherit genes like normal. You are manifestations of the same genetic pattern appearing at different points in time. Sarah suddenly straightened her eyes, glued to the pendant. Let me see it. Marcus carefully opened the storage compartment. The amber, about the size of a walnut, glowed with a warm, pulsing light. When Sarah reached out, the light flickered as if waiting for the hand it recognized. Thomas had called it a catalyst. Elela Nena, said her voice drifting far away. It contains a biological sample from my first encounter with the collectors. Eliza tilted her head slightly, her eyes following the strange object lying silently on the cold table. "Can I see it?" she asked gently, bringing the scanner closer. The screen immediately jumped with unstable data lines. It's emitting quantum fluctuations consistent with time travel. In simple terms, it exists partly in our timeline and partly somewhere else. Sarah said nothing, just closed her hand around the pendant. And the moment her fingertips touched the cold surface, the entire lighting system in the lab suddenly turned bright, then plunged into absolute darkness. The backup generator kicked in a few seconds later, providing a pale, dreamlike glow. "Did you see that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with excitement. "Yes, they were there," Marcus said slowly, his eyes still lingering on the fading figures. "The original family?" Sarah asked again. Just for a moment, Elena shuddered, like shadows, moving across this room. How could that be? Eliza glanced at the screen, whispering, as if afraid to awaken a dormant secret. "This pendant, it's a quantum anchor. It somehow connects all versions of the Blackwood bloodline across time." A low groan interrupted. James winced, bringing a hand to his nose as drops of blood began to seep out. But when he spoke, his voice was ancient, as if echoing from a lost century. "Father said, the calculations are complete. The door can open, but we must go through it together. Otherwise, we will be separated forever." Elena stared at him dumbfounded. James. His gaze suddenly cleared confusion, replacing the strange certainty. "What just happened? You sound as if—" Sarah hesitated, "as if you were Jacob Blackwood, the eldest son." The room suddenly felt cramped, the air thick with the mist of a stormy night. "It's happening faster than we thought," Sarah whispered, her hands tightening on the arms of the chair. "The time barriers are disintegrating around us." Eliza looked up from the tablet, her face pale. "That's not all. I've been tracking Sarah's biodata since these phenomena began." "Sarah, when was your last—" Sarah frowned. "I don't understand what that question has to do with—" Because Eliza lowered her voice according to these hormone levels. "You're pregnant." No one had time to speak. Another sound interrupted the sound of car engines roaring outside. Black SUVs suddenly appeared in the university parking lot, moving with the cold precision of a trained army. Elena looked down from the lab window, her voice carried by the wind. "They found us." Marcus immediately rushed to the computer, his hands flying over the keyboard. "I knew it was risky to announce the initial findings, but I didn't expect them to react so quickly." The door swung open before anyone could make another defensive move. A woman in her 40s entered. Her black hair was neatly tied back, her face was stern, and her identification card was ready in her hand. "Dr. Elena Webb." Her voice was sharp but not lacking in composure. "I am Agent Diana Foster, Department of Energy Special Projects Division." Her eyes swept the room, lingering a beat longer on Sarah and James. "I see the resemblance between your families." Elena reflexively stepped forward to stand between the research team and the stranger. "What do you want?" "Help you," Foster replied, placing her briefcase on the table. "And a warning." She opened the briefcase and took out an old faded file, marked with a secret level stamp. Operation Timeweave established 1947. Black and white photos spread out the Blackwood homestead thermal scans of a secret lab surveillance photos of faces spanning decades. You've been tracking the Blackwood descendants, James murmured, recognizing several familiar faces from his genealogical research to protect them, as well as to protect national security, Foster confirmed. While we've lost track of some branches of the family over the years, your new genetic findings have brought the family back into focus. Eliza narrowed her eyes, suspicious. Why would the government be interested in the genome of a single family? Foster was silent for a few seconds, then pulled out another document. Because the Blackwoods are not unique. Throughout recorded history, we have discovered at least 17 other families. Families with unexplained genetic continuity, and then they all disappeared without a trace. She spread out a map of the world, dotted with red dots. Each incident occurs at a thin point, a place where the veil between realities naturally weakens. You've been watching us, since Elelanena asked, her voice as taut as a bowstring. Since the first time your DNA comparisons were uploaded to the university servers, Foster admitted. We have algorithms that look for specific patterns. And you've been in this building for 3 weeks, right? Marcus froze. What? Foster tilted her head toward the corner of the ceiling, where a subtle seam revealed a hidden camera. The night shift janitor, the new cafeteria worker, the HVAC technician who fixed the system last month. They were all my people. Sarah unconsciously put her hand on her stomach as if to protect something fragile. Why reveal yourself now? Because you're in imminent danger, Foster said, her calm facade cracking. And because I have a personal reason. She opened her phone, showing an old faded photo, a man dressed in 1960s clothing, standing in front of the Blackwood house. My grandfather, Dr. Robert Foster. He was the leader of the team that discovered the secret lab in 1963. 2 weeks later, he disappeared while there alone. Official records say he fled. But my grandmother, she always believed something had taken him. James asked softly. So, we should believe her, because whatever is hunting your family also took someone I love. Foster replied, her voice low. And because we have the resources you need. She looked straight at Eliza, her gaze piercing the thick air. Your theory of time travel is correct, Dr. Blackwood. Since the Cold War, we have developed the technology to detect and measure these anomalies. Eliza swallowed, understanding the military implications of her words. The military must have been aiming to exploit them, she whispered. Yes, Foster nodded. But my unit's primary mission is still defense. Can you feel it? The black SUVs silently under the pale yellow lights, the ancient bloodlines touching the present, and a secret that has existed for generations now awakening. If it were you, what would you do if you knew that time was no longer linear, and your family was the key to the door that had never been opened? Those entities, the collectors, the hungry, whatever you call them. Foster said the words sliding on the cold air have been spotted repeatedly, attempting to penetrate our reality. Elelanena held her gaze fixedly on the agent. What exactly are you offering? Protection, resources, and information. Foster opened the briefcase, pulling out a final file. This is a partial translation of symbols found at other vanishing sites. We believe it is a warning of a phenomenon called convergence. Marcus took the paper, his eyes slowly darkening as he read each line. A temporal event where all the fragments of a divided bloodline are reunited. Yes, Foster continued, glancing briefly at Sarah and James. And it's happening right now. For the first time in nearly 2 centuries, the descendants of Blackwood are gathering in sufficient numbers. You're creating a beacon, sending a signal across time and space, and Sarah fell silent, whispering softly, as if afraid of the sound of her own voice. Paint a target on all of our backs. The underground government facility hummed with a sound like a giant heartbeat. Technicians hurried to make final adjustments around the device that occupied the center of the lab. It was a machine based on Thomas Blackwood's original design, enhanced with modern technology. A circular base surrounded by gleaming metal arms that curved like steel petals, closing around a mystery. Is this safe? Eleanor asked, her eyes never leaving the glowing metal ring. Absolutely not, Foster replied without hesitation. But theoretical models suggest minimal risk if we only conduct controlled exposure. A week had passed since the team had been brought to the secure facility. The walls were thick concrete, covered in what Foster called dimension-blurring technology, which she claimed would hide them from collectors. Marcus stood before the screen, staring at the holographic simulation that floated like a mirage. Thomas Blackwood's calculations are incredible. With our modifications, we can create a stable observation window into 1847. A window, not a door, Foster insisted. Just observation. No physical interaction with the past. James sat silently beside her, electrodes running from his temples to a brainwave monitor. Of all the Blackwood descendants, his time slips were coming more and more frequently. Moments where he spoke in the voice of Jacob Blackwood. Every gesture had the nuance of a 19th century boy. "I am ready," James said softly, his voice strangely calm despite the danger. Zara watched from behind the protective shield, her hand unconsciously pressed to her belly. Her pregnancy had been confirmed. But strangely, the process was progressing faster than normal, with biological indicators never before recorded. Foster had arranged for a special medical team to monitor her 24 hours a day. Starting, Eliza announced, her fingers flying over the control panel. The metal arms of the device slowly moved, emitting a deep, cosmic sigh. "The quantum field is stabilizing," Marcus reported, his eyes never leaving the indicators. "The time portal is forming." The space inside the metal circle rippled like heat on a summer road, then darkened, thickening into a layer of suspended darkness, locking on coordinates. Spring, 1847, Blackwood Homestead. Eliza continued, her voice almost a prayer. James suddenly hissed, his back arching as the electrodes sparked. "I feel them," he whispered, his eyes widening. "They're right there, just a curtain away." In the darkness, shadows parted like wind-blown mist. And then, incredibly, the Blackwood family dining room came into focus, early spring sunlight streaming through windows that had been there for nearly 2 centuries. "Oh my God," Foster whispered, her breath catching in her throat. It worked. The group stood transfixed as Thomas Blackwood entered the room from the past, holding the same amber pendant they had found. Though there was no sound, his every gesture exuded urgency as he spoke to his wife Catherine. This is the day they disappeared. Elena realized her heart pounding. Suddenly, James held his head in his hands, blood dripping from his nose. When he opened his mouth, his voice had the solemn tone of a lost time. Father said, "We must leave before dawn. The calculations are complete. The spacefold will scatter our essences across multiple times, hiding us from their gaze." James? Elena hurried forward worried, but he kept his gaze fixed on the time window, continuing in Jacob's voice. The collectors cannot track something that exists in multiple times at once. Her bloodline will be scattered, but still connected by the anchor. Marcus raised his head, his expression tense. The window is destabilizing. Something is interfering with the energy field. Through the viewport, Thomas Blackwood suddenly stopped. He slowly turned his head and looked straight at them. He knows we're watching. Eliza whispered, her breath fading into the hum of the machine. In the vision of the past, Thomas stepped into what, from his perspective, was nothing but air. He held out his hand, exactly where their window hovered. "Disconnect." Foster ordered, his voice hard. "I can't," Eliza replied, her fingers moving frantically. "The field is self-sustaining." In the vision, shadows behind Thomas began to rise, not natural darkness, but a conscious blackness creeping forward like endless arms. "The collectors," Sarah choked. James stood abruptly, walking toward the window of time, as if hypnotized. "They see us," he said, his voice and Jacob's merging. "Through time, they see us." The shadows of the past twisted and turned. They were no longer aimed at Thomas Blackwood, but turned directly towards them, those who dared to look through the veil of time. Can you feel it? The vibrations of the machine, the gazes that spanned 2 centuries, and the shadows that seemed to know every breath of the person watching. If it were you, would you continue to watch? Or would you close your eyes before they could find their way into this world? Have you ever wondered if there are fragile doors just waiting for a vibration to open between the present and the past? In the room deep underground, the cold air seemed to hold every breath, entities known by many names, the collectors, the hungry, or simply they have been spotted repeatedly trying to infiltrate our reality. Elena watched the woman before her with a cautious gaze. "So, what do you bring?" Agent Foster gently set the briefcase down, her voice even and rehearsed. "Protection, resources, and information." She pulled out one last document, the paper discolored by time. "This is a rough translation of symbols found at other missing sites. We believe this is a warning of something called convergence." Marcus took the paper, his eyes slowly darkening as he read the words that trembled like they had breathed a century before. An event where fragments of the same bloodline will reunite. And yes, it is happening now. Foster looked directly at Sarah and James, her voice low as a whisper to the room itself. For the first time in nearly 200 years, the descendants of Blackwood are gathering in sufficient numbers to light a beacon across time and space. And you are making yourselves the target. Sarah shuddered. "We are painting a target on our backs," she whispered. The government facility shuddered like a giant waking up. In the center, the machine dominated the space, a circular steel platform, surrounded by curved metal arms that resembled glistening limbs. Based on Thomas Blackwood's designs, now upgraded with modern technology, it is called a temporal resonance device. "Is this really safe?" Eleanor asked, her eyes still glued to the cold gleam of the metal. "Absolutely not," Foster replied without blinking. "But theoretical models suggest the risk is manageable." A week had passed since the group had been brought to this underground facility. 4 concrete walls, reinforced with what Foster called dimensional dampening technology, a kind of cloak to hide them from the collectors. Marcus stared at the holographic simulation hovering above the work table. Thomas Blackwood's calculations are astonishing. With our adjustments, we can open a stable view back to the spring of 1847. Just observe, no interaction. "Just a window, not a door," Foster insisted. James sat next to him, electrodes attached to his temples. Of all the Blackwoods, his episodes were the most frequent moments when he spoke in Jacob Blackwood's voice. His gestures, his gaze. Like a young man from the 19th century. "I am ready," he said, his voice steady despite the obvious danger. Zara stood behind her goggles, her arms clutching her belly. Her pregnancy was progressing unnaturally fast. The child inside her was developing at a pace that defied medical logic. Foster had assigned a medical team to monitor her closely. Commencing activation, Eliza announced, her fingers hovering over the control panel. The metal arms began to rotate slowly, emitting a deep, subterranean hum. "Quantum field stable," Marcus reported, his eyes fixed on the readings. "Tracking coordinates: Spring 1847 Blackwood Estate." The air inside the carousel rippled like summer heat, rising off the pavement, then darkened a pool of darkness, suspended in midair. Suddenly, James jerked his back, arching, the electrodes sparking. "I feel them," he whispered, his voice echoing from an invisible crack. "They're just on the other side of the curtain." The darkness in the carousel rippled, then opened like melting mist. And then they saw it. The Blackwood dining room sunlight from nearly 2 centuries ago pouring through the windows. "Oh my God," Foster breathed. Thomas Blackwood stepped into the scene, holding the same amber pendant they'd found. No sound, just urgent gestures as he spoke to his wife Catherine. "This is the day they disappeared," Elena realized. James suddenly clutched his head, blood dripping from his nose. When he spoke, his voice had a strangely ancient cadence. "Father said we must leave before dawn. The calculations are complete. The dimensional fold will scatter our essences across the time streams, hiding us from their gaze." Marcus blinked, the readings on the screen oscillating wildly. "The door is destabilizing. Something is interfering." In the image, Thomas Blackwood froze, his eyes fixed on where they stood, as if he sensed a gaze from the future. "He sees us." Eliza trembled. Thomas stepped closer, reaching out toward what, from his perspective, was nothing more than an invisible void. "Shut down the system," Foster shouted. "No way," Eliza shook her head, her hands running across the control panel. "The school is self-sustaining." The darkness in the doorway was thick long thin wisps of smoke reaching out like hungry fingers. Collectors, Sarah choked. James stood up abruptly, his voice mingling with Jacob's. They see us. Through time, they see. The shadow suddenly rushed toward the doorway itself. A high-pitched screech ripped through the air. The machine shuddered, the arm spinning so fast it was a blur. Then bang, the doorway collapsed, rolling in a low explosion that sent everyone tumbling. Emergency lights flickered, a red glow sweeping the room. The resonator was nothing but twisted metal, like melted plastic. James lay unconscious, blood streaming from his nose and ears. "Call the paramedics," Elena screamed, kneeling beside him. In the infirmary 3 days later, James was still motionless, his breathing even, but his mind locked somewhere out of reach. Sarah had fallen asleep beside him, her belly now visible despite only being a few weeks pregnant. Marcus entered holding a sealed box marked with a biohazard symbol. "You need to see this." Inside a glass tube containing a tissue sample preserved since 1963 once in Thomas Blackwood's lab. Eleanor placed the sample under the microscope, then fell silent. "There's no way. These cells are still active after nearly 2 centuries. Marcus nodded, his voice soft, as if afraid the very sound would awaken something in the sample. "They're still dividing. A cycle that lasts decades. And more importantly, the DNA is constantly changing, cycling through multiple states every 24 hours, as if existing in multiple realities at once." Eleanor glanced at Marcus, her question unspoken. And when compared to the Blackwood descendants, he flipped open the screen, revealing 2 genetic bands. They match, but only at certain moments in the cycle. "Are you saying that their genetic makeup is linked over time?" "Not just linked," Marcus said cautiously. "They don't just carry the same genes, they're mirroring the same genetic pattern, but at different points in a quantum loop." The door slid open. Agent Foster and Eliza entered, their faces heavy. "The data is complete," Eliza said. When the door collapsed, it not only severed the connection, but also created quantum entanglement between the 2 eras. The time barrier has thinned considerably. Foster clenched his jaw. "Last night, we detected 3 small intrusions. Right here, in this facility." Marcus put the tissue sample back in the box, his gaze piercing the steel. "One more thing. Sarah's ultrasound. The fetus carries the same genetic signature, but it doesn't rotate. It exists in a quantum state of stability." Eliza translated softly, "The child exists at all times. It is the anchor connecting all versions of the Blackwood bloodline." A soft, windy voice drifted from the door. Thomas knew this would happen. Sarah stood there, her hand on her belly, her gaze distant. He calculated that the bloodline would have to be divided before it could be united. "This child is the final part of the plan." "How do you know?" Foster asked, his eyes skeptical. "Because Catherine told me," Sarah replied, her voice low and dreamy. "Every night, her voice gets clear." The alarm suddenly blared. "Perimeter penetration area 7. Foster read quickly on the device. 3 security teams have lost contact. On the monitor, black smoke was creeping through the ventilation system. "They found us," Eliza whispered. The steel shutters slammed shut, sounding like a warning. "Get everyone to the main cabin," Foster ordered. "James can't move," Elena reminded. The sound of medical equipment suddenly blared. On the monitor, James sat up, eyes wide, staring into an invisible void. "They're coming through the wall." Sarah shivered, clutching her stomach. "They've smelled us." Through time. Marcus quickly gathered the tissue samples and all the data. "If their target is the Blackwood bloodline, we have to split up. Distract them." Foster nodded. "Elena, Nina, Marcus, take Sarah to the safe room. Eliza, come with me. We'll get James." But as they were about to leave, Sarah suddenly collapsed, her breathing labored. "The baby," she gasped. "It's reacting to their presence." Her water broke like a wordless reply. "She's in labor." Elena panicked. "It's only 6 months." Sarah looked up, her eyes flashing with a timeless understanding. "No. Now is the time. Have you ever thought a family could scatter themselves across the timeline just to escape an invisible predator?" In the safe room, the thick, reinforced steel walls vibrated softly, as if the ground itself were reminding them that the convergence had begun. Elena crouched beside Sarah, her voice calm but her eyes unmistakably tense. Contractions. 4 minutes apart, she reported, her eyes glued to the monitor on her portable monitor. "But her vital signs are fine." Sarah lay on the narrow bed, sweat covering her pale face. Between her rapid breaths, she whispered, as if afraid the walls themselves could hear. "We need to decipher the letters. There's something we don't understand yet." Marcus looked up from the makeshift workbench, which was filled with equipment brought from the main lab. Before him lay a faded stack of letters, correspondences between Thomas and Catherine Blackwood, found in his grandfather Foster's archives. This code... Marcus shook his head slightly. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's mathematically structured, and it also contains the languages of many different peoples." Sarah suppressed a pain, the corners of her lips trembling. "It's a family code," she whispered. Catherine, we used it to keep our diaries safe for generations." Elena looked at Marcus, her heart pounding. More and more, Sarah seemed to be merging with fragments of her ancestors' memories, a spirit of the past seeping through her every breath. "Can you help me decode it?" Marcus asked softly. Sarah nodded slightly, signaling to hand her the tablet. Between contractions, her fingers slowly traced letters, phrases that seemed meaningless but contained patterns. Layer by layer of symbols revealed themselves, and Marcus felt his face darken. "They know they are being hunted," he read slowly. "Collectors. They exist outside the linearity of time, following the unique resonance of our blood. Through every barrier." "There's more," Sarah urged, sweat dripping in icy drops. Marcus continued, his voice low, as if swallowed by the words. "We can't fight something we don't understand. The only hope is to disintegrate, to scatter the self across time. The ritual will fracture the family's history, creating echoes that appear across generations. The collectors can't track something that exists in multiple temporal states at once." A strong contraction nearly jolted Sarah out of bed, the medical equipment beeping with deafening alarms. But when the pain passed, her eyes were strangely clear. Thomas discovered this after studying the amber. He realized our bloodlines inherently carry the ability to disperse time from a meeting older than written history. Elena asked softly, adjusting the painkillers. "What do you mean?" Marcus replied, his voice heavy. That the Blackwoods were never entirely human, at least not in the way we understand it. Emergency lights flashed, a distant explosion echoed, shaking the walls of the room. The comms crackled before Foster's voice rang out urgent, as if stretched across multiple layers of space. We've taken James to Site Beta. The East Wing has been breached. They are unlike anything we've ever trained for. Conventional weapons pass through them like air. Sarah jumped to her feet, her breath ragged. The Guardian symbols in Thomas's journal. There's a secret vault under the main fireplace. Marcus searched through the digital copy, his eyes flashing at the blurred text. The ritual chamber. Under the lab. We found his lab, but what if it goes deeper? Sarah gripped Elena's hand, the sudden strength forcing her to brace herself. The family Bible contains a map, a series of symbols. When arranged correctly, they will open the final chamber. There Thomas prepared the ritual to scatter the family through time and to show them the way back. Marcus paused, a terrible realization dawning on him. The convergence was no accident. It was designed from the beginning. The system crackled, Eliza's voice cutting through the noise. Marcus, can you see these readings? The temporal distortion is increasing exponentially. The fabric of reality around the facility is tearing apart. Before Marcus could reply, Sarah screamed loudly, her body arching. The screen jumped wildly, the fetal heart rate fluctuating from 60 to 300 beats per minute, something impossible in normal physiology. Unless, Marcus swallowed, the child exists in multiple temporal states at once. Sarah's eyes suddenly widened, glowing a pale blue, as if carrying the entire night sky within her. When she spoke, her voice was no longer her own, but the solemn cadence of Catherine Blackwood. They've found us again. The circle is closing. Thomas was right. They can't be defeated in this reality. So, where Elena asked, her voice trembling. In their own world, Sarah or Catherine whispered, the child is the key, born of broken time, existing in all realities at once. She turned to Elena, the light in her eyes softening, but still carrying the weight of centuries. Take them to the ancestral home, to the final room, where it all began and where it all must end. Darkness fell suddenly. The power grid had completely shut down, leaving only the red emergency lights to flicker like the heartbeat of a dying world. Sarah's eyes still glittered in the darkness, like two stars lost in the maze of time. Smoke drifted through the hallway. Elena led Sarah to the emergency exit. Marcus following close behind, clutching documents and equipment. The only pieces left in a fractured reality. Sporadic gunshots echoed from the concrete corridors, interspersed with screeching sounds that didn't sound like anything else of this world. Just a little further. Almost to the car park, Eleanor whispered encouragingly, still supporting Sarah's heavy body as a new contraction tightened her belly. There, right in the wall, Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as if watching for hidden movements between layers of space that the others couldn't see. They turned the corner and found Agent Foster and Eliza waiting by the armored car, its engine roaring, ready to move at any moment. Behind them, James lay unconscious on a stretcher, his face ashen. What happened to him? Elena demanded, helping Marcus carry Sarah into the car. He came to himself in the middle of the attack. Foster said, his voice heavy, and began to speak, but not in just one voice. Several voices at once, as if the entire Blackwood clan were jostling to speak through him. Foster hesitated. Then he had a seizure. And then silence. As Marcus climbed into the car, a small metal object fell from his pocket and rolled across the floor, moving strangely as if defying all laws of gravity. It was a geometrical shape that gleamed with a cold silver light, its edges seemingly askew, as if part of it existed in another dimension. "Don't touch it," Sarah cried. But it was too late. Foster had already reached out to pick it up. The moment her fingers touched the silver surface, Foster froze. Her whole body stiffened, and the metal seemed to melt into her palm. "What is that?" Elena choked. "A harvester mark," Sarah whispered, her breath shaking. "A fragment of their reality. With a touch, it can mark and track beings across the walls of time." Foster's eyes slowly changed color, a dark brown, fading to a milky white. When she moved again, every step, every gesture was forced, distorted, as if her body were being controlled by a hand that had never learned to be human. "The vessel has taken over," Foster said, but the sound was not just her voice but also weighed down by a high-pitched frequency that made everyone's ears hurt. "The bloodline has been located. The harvesting has begun." Eliza hurried forward, but Marcus pulled her back. "That is no longer Foster." Foster's head swiveled with unnatural speed, pointing straight at Sarah. "Convergence container. Identified. Priority for capture." Before she could react, Foster charged forward, like a whirlwind. Marcus blocked her path, but was flung like a rag doll, slamming into the wall and collapsing. Eliza quickly activated the car's defense system. Electricity shot across the floor, momentarily stopping Foster. "Hurry!" Eliza shouted. "The electricity won't last long." Eleanor quickly helped Sarah into the car's compartment. Eliza sped away, leaving Foster's frozen figure behind in a red flash of lightning. The alarm continued to blare as the security doors closed like giant traps. Eliza turned the wheel, sending the car through the last crack before it collapsed. Outside, the grey sky of dawn seemed oblivious to the chaos roaring inside. The entire research facility, which was disguised as a boring weather station, was now silent. "Where to?" Eliza asked, her eyes still on the wet road ahead. "To the manor," Eleanor said softly. Sarah said, "We have to find the last room under the fireplace." A dull explosion echoed behind them. From the carriage windows, they could only see part of the building disappear. Not collapse, but be erased, as if a piece of reality had been cut from the universe. "They're breaking through all barriers," Sarah whispered. "Dimensions are melting." Above, clouds gathered into a huge black vortex. Thunder flashed, but instead of illuminating, the lightning swallowed the surrounding light. Suddenly, James jerked violently on the stretcher. His back arched so hard he thought it would break. When he opened his eyes, they were as white as Foster's. James Eleanor rushed forward. His hand grabbed her wrist, squeezing so hard, the bones cracked. "The harvest begins. All the fragments will be recovered." His voice rang out in a ghostly tone. James, remember who are you? Sarah called out. For a moment, a flicker of humanity flashed in his eyes. He tensed, released Eleanor's wrists, and looked up at the ceiling. Go, go. I'll hold them. Can't leave you. Eleanor cried. Have to go. Sarah gasped, a fierce contraction gripping her belly again. The baby is coming. It all depends on getting to the manor before it's born. James's scream echoed behind him, both painful and a strange triumph lingering in the rain. It was pouring rain by the time they reached the isolated cabin that had been chosen as their final stop. Eleanor hastily carved protective symbols around the perimeter following Thomas's instructions in his journal, a mixture of salt iron filings and a dye made from rare herbs. Inside, Eliza tested the equipment they'd collected from the facility, splicing it with the mundane electronic components they'd hastily purchased on the run. Sarah lay on the makeshift bed, her belly already distended beyond recognition. The pale blue veins beneath her skin, glowing faintly as if filled with some inhuman energy. The readings are stable, Eliza whispered, her eyes glued to the screen. The symbols on the outside seem to create a buffer between dimensions. Eleanor stepped in, brushing the rain off her coat. The last symbol is complete. How is Sarah? It's okay for now, Eliza said softly. But the development of the fetus? She paused, her voice trembling. 7 months in, less than 3 weeks. Nothing like that has ever been recorded in medicine. Marcus brought in a tattered old map and carefully spread it out on the table. Here he pointed to the intricate symbols that connected the various red dots around the world. 16 locations, the points where the boundaries between natural dimensions are thinnest. Thomas scattered the family here, and here he touched the spot where they were standing is the epicenter, where the Blackwoods disappeared. Eleanor looked at the dark red ink and the other red dots, the latest disappearances of Blackwood descendants. Marcus said, his voice heavy. 5 in a week. Boston has been tracking. But now, a soft moan interrupted. Sarah opened her eyes, her breathing quickening. Eleanor hurried to the bedside. How long until we reach the manor? Sarah asked hoarsely. Tomorrow, early in the morning, Eleanor reassured. Let's rest. There's not enough time. Sarah gripped Eleanor's wrist with a strange force. The time layers are converging faster. Can't you feel it? As if in answer, the cabin lights flickered out and then flickered back on. Outside, the rain stopped abruptly, replaced by a chilly silence. They're searching, Eliza whispered, her eyes scanning the gauges. But the barrier's still holding. They can't pinpoint the exact location yet. Help me to the map. Sarah gestured between Eliza and Eleanor. Sarah walked slowly to the table. Her fingertips traced the intricate lines like a maze mapped out centuries ago. Thomas, has it all figured out? She said softly, as if talking to a dream. The family didn't disappear randomly. They were all placed in the right places to create a temporal distortion. Not to hide, but to focus. Like a lens, Eliza suggested. More like a converging lens. Sarah corrected, her hand on her stomach. All pointing to the child. Marcus glanced at the laptop where the global news feeds were constantly being updated. The strange phenomenon is spreading, he reported. Unexplained disappearances, electronic system, failures, time distortions. People say they relive the same moment over and over again. He paused, looking silently at Sarah where the blue lines of light pulsed under her taut skin, like the heartbeat of another world knocking at her door. The air inside the Blackwood homestead felt charged, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. "The barriers are weakening," Sarah said at last, her voice low but certain. "The collectors are growing desperate. They know the convergence is almost here." Elelanina's brow furrowed. "And when it happens, what exactly is this convergence?" Marcus glanced up from the flickering screens. According to Thomas's calculations, all temporal fragments of the Blackwood bloodline will align for a single instant every generation, every echo existing in the same point in space-time. The energy released, Sarah continued, will either collapse the dimensional barriers completely or seal them forever. Her hand rested on her abdomen, a silent reminder of the stakes. A shrill alarm split the quiet. Massive energy surge, Eliza reported, eyes locked on her instruments. Multiple dimensional breaches within 100-mile radius closing fast. The cabin shuddered under invisible pressure. The protective symbols carved into its walls flared a cold blue, fighting against an encroaching force. "They've found us," Elelanina breathed. "Not exactly," Sarah corrected, scanning the readouts. "But they're narrowing in. My contractions are stronger. The child feels them coming." Marcus began sweeping papers and drives into a pack. "We have to move. The wards won't last." Another contraction gripped Sarah, forcing a gasp. "Seconds," she warned. Outside, the sky writhed an unnatural purple. Clouds spiraled against the laws of weather, as if the atmosphere itself had come unpinned. A bolt of darkness lightning that devoured rather than illuminated struck the ground near the cabin. The protective symbols blazed one final blinding flash, then faded to a dull ember. "First barrier breached," Eliza said sharply. Minutes at best. They fled. Behind them, the cabin folded inward like collapsing paper, until nothing remained but a perfect sphere of blackness, shrinking to nothing. The road to the Blackwood homestead twisted into a nightmare of repeating turns and looping miles. Twice they passed the same hollow oak. Once the landscape flickered, showing a frozen winter from another century, layered over the present. By the time dawn bled across the horizon, the homestead stood silent and waiting. The forest around it was deathly still. No birds, no wind, only a deep, vibrating hush. Sarah lay in the back seat, her skin faintly luminous contractions, now only minutes apart. Inside the house, dust motes hung motionless in air, thick with temporal distortion. The old dining table wavered between states half rotted, half immaculate, as if time itself could not decide its condition. "The barriers here are paper thin," Eliza whispered, readings spiking wildly. "Multiple timelines are bleeding through." They carried Sarah to the main room, near the hearth where Thomas Blackwood was said to have hidden his final chamber. Marcus searched frantically for the mechanism Thomas described in his journals. "We don't have time," Sarah gasped. "Use the memory extraction device." Eliza hesitated. "It's untested." "There is no choice," Sarah cut in. The answers are in our blood. The device, an intricate silver circlet laced with quantum resonators, was lowered onto Sarah's head. This may be disorienting, Eliza warned. I already live their memories, Sarah said softly. This will only sharpen the focus. The circlet hummed, rising to a near musical pitch. Sarah stiffened, eyes rolling back until only the whites showed. I see them, she whispered. All of them. The original family. Her voice shifted, taking on the cadence of Catherine Blackwood. The children are gathered. Thomas has prepared the amber catalyst, a fragment for each of us to anchor across time. The collectors breach the outer barriers. We see them shadows with too many limbs' eyes that pierce across dimensions. Her breathing quickened. Thomas activates the device. Artifacts ring the room, each tuned to a different temporal frequency. Reality tears and scatters us. Our bodies remain in 1847, but our essence fractures across generations, unborn. We become quantum ghosts living in many eras at once. Sarah's back arched violently. Eliza moved to remove the circlet, but Elena held her back. She's at the critical memory, Eliza said. Sarah's voice strained, words spilling like water through breaking glass. Thomas holds the master anchor, the one device that can reunite the fragments. It can only be activated when every bloodline echo has reconverged. The final chamber holds the mechanism of return. Her eyes snapped open, glowing an unnatural blue. I understand now. The Blackwoods were never entirely human. Centuries before Thomas, our ancestors touched the collectors in a ritual gone wrong. That contact altered us, changed our bloodline at a quantum level, granting the ability to perceive and manipulate temporal barriers. She fixed her shining gaze on Eleanor. The collectors have harvested special bloodlines for millennia, using them as bridges between worlds. With each successful harvest, their influence spreads further into our reality. A contraction racked Sarah's body. She clutched her abdomen, breathless but certain. Thomas didn't scatter the family merely to hide us. He built a temporal loop to lead to this exact moment, to this child, a being who exists in all times at once, one who can either seal the barriers forever or tear them open completely. The homestead trembled like a living thing, its walls flexing as reality flickered in and out of alignment. Through the warped window panes, they caught fleeting visions, alien horizons where the sky bent into impossible angles. Ocean suspended in midair, dark silhouettes gliding with the hungry patience of predators. They're converging. Sarah gasped, clutching her abdomen. Every timeline. All at once. We have to find the chamber now. Marcus knelt beside the hearth, his notepad spread across the floor, equations spilling off the page and onto the very wood beneath him. His pencil traced frantic calculations, the numbers glowing faintly as if eager to escape the paper. These alignments, Thomas predicted all of this nearly 2 centuries ago, Marcus murmured almost reverently. Eliza adjusted the trembling sensors on her console. Temporal distortions are climbing exponentially. At this rate, we have less than 6 hours before total dimensional collapse. Another ripple of distortion swept through the house. For a heartbeat, the room dissolved into 1847. They stood inside the homestead as it once was. Fresh timber walls, candlelight flickering, shadowy figures moving through their evening routines, ghosts of a life long past. Then, with a sound like tearing silk, the present snapped back. "I've got it!" Marcus suddenly exclaimed. He pressed a precise pattern of wooden panels around the hearth, a sequence pulled from Thomas Blackwood's encrypted journals. A deep grinding echoed beneath the floor. Ancient mechanisms stirred awake, and the hearthstones slid apart, revealing a narrow staircase descending into absolute darkness. A cold draught rose to meet them, scented faintly of metal and dried herbs, like a place where time itself had been distilled. "Help me with Sarah Elelanina," ordered. Together they lifted her carefully. Sarah floated between consciousness and delirium, her body, releasing visible waves of temporal energy that shimmered the air around her, like heat rising from stone. The hidden chamber below proved smaller than expected, yet impossibly intact, a perfect hexagon lined with mirrors of polished silver. Each reflected their faces from angles that defied geometry, showing not only their present selves but fleeting older versions, past lives' future echoes, children not yet born. In the center stood a raised dais, shaped to cradle a human body, the convergence chamber. Sarah whispered, her voice blending with Catherine Blackwood's, as if the two women shared the same breath. Thomas built it to focus and direct the energy released when the bloodline realigns. Eleanor guided Sarah onto the dais. Her breaths came sharp and fast, contractions surging like distant thunder. The mirrors glowed faintly in answer their light, pulsing to the rhythm of Sarah's heartbeat. Eliza's equipment shrieked as readings spiked. "These fluctuations confirm it," she said. "When all living descendants gather, the signal acts like a beacon across every dimension. We've been shining a lighthouse through the fog of time. No wonder the collectors have closed in so quickly." A sudden thud from above froze them in place. Heavy boots on old wood, multiple voices speaking in perfect mechanical unison. The sound of descending footsteps followed. Agent Foster emerged from the stairwell, her eyes clouded with an unnatural white sheen. Behind her came a squad of government operatives, each wearing the same hollow gaze faces, slack movements, too precise to be human. "Stay back, Elelanina," warned, stepping protectively between Sarah and the intruders. "The agency is compromised," Eliza whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "They are possessed. The collectors are inside them." Foster tilted her head at an angle that no human neck should allow. When she spoke, her voice carried a layered resonance, a harmonic echo that seemed to vibrate inside their skulls. "Your resistance is irrelevant. The convergence proceeds as designed." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "As designed? You mean this was planned?" Foster's lips curved into something that only resembled a smile. "Did you think discovering the Blackwood lineage was chance? Every step you've taken has followed the path we prepared. Thomas Blackwood's grand plan was never his own." "That's impossible," Elelanina shot back. "We've been fighting to stop you." "You've been completing the work we began," Foster replied calmly. "We allowed Thomas to believe scattering the family would save them. In truth, it created the conditions for a perfect convergence, one vessel carrying the entire temporal signature of a dimensionally sensitive bloodline." Her gaze dropped to Sarah's swollen abdomen. "That child," she said, the harmonic undertone deepening until the mirrors trembled, "is the culmination of millennia of preparation. A key to the final barrier. Through this birth, the collectors will harvest all realities, and your world will remain open to us forever. The chamber vibrated like a struck bell, its mirrored walls trembling with a low resonance that seemed to hum inside their bones. Another voice joined Foster's, this one wearing the crisp uniform of a decorated general. His eyes, milk white and depthless, reflected the same alien intelligence. The government has known for decades. The general intoned his voice, threaded with the same unnatural harmonic. Since 1947, they have worked alongside us, believing dimensional technology could be tamed, weaponized. Fools. All of them. Elena thoughts spiraled. If the collectors had been shaping events from the beginning, then every desperate choice, every hidden clue, every mile of their journey had unfolded exactly as intended. The Blackwood bloodline was always special. Foster continued her smile, a stiff mimicry of human expression. Centuries ago, we touched them with our essence, gifting them the sight to perceive dimensional barriers. Thomas merely quickened a process we began long before his birth. At the console, Eliza's fingers danced over her instruments, her brow furrowing. "Wait," she said slowly. "If you've been manipulating the timeline for centuries, why now? Why wait for Sarah's pregnancy? Why not take her the moment you sensed the child?" For the briefest instant, the possessed body of Agent Foster hesitated, an infinitesimal break in the collector's perfect poise. They couldn't. Marcus breathed, realization dawning. Something in Thomas's plan blocked them. Some kind of protection they never anticipated. The mask, Elena, whispered memory, flashing of the tribal artifact, etched with spiraling symbols. Sarah's eyes flared an electric blue as another contraction seized her. Thomas did know. She gasped, voice trembling with both pain and triumph. He found something hidden in the tribal writings, a way to turn their own design against them. The mirrors around the chamber pulsed brighter, feeding on the rising temporal current emanating from Sarah. The possessed agents flinched as the air distorted, rippling like a heat mirage. The convergence has begun. Foster announced, her alien tone laced with cruel satisfaction. "Too late for your resistance." But a new voice cut through the pulsing air, familiar and unmistakably human. "Not too late," it called. Exactly as Thomas planned. James Blackwood stepped into view at the top of the stairs, the tribal mask clutched tightly against his chest. His movements were slow, deliberate, every step echoing like a heartbeat. Though pale and drawn, his eyes burned with a fierce clarity. James Elena cried, relief flooding her voice. "How did you escape?" "I didn't," James replied simply. "I let it believe it controlled me, while I guarded a fragment of my mind." The mask kept the door open, just wide enough to resist full possession. Foster tilted her head, the motion sharp and inhuman. Impossible. No human consciousness can partition itself against us. No ordinary human. James countered his grip, tightening on the mask. But then, Blackwoods were never entirely human, were they? You made sure of that, centuries ago. He moved toward the dais where Sarah lay, trembling. The glow around her abdomen pulsed in time, with the mirror's shifting light. Contractions 4 minutes apart, Elena reported softly. Stable. For now. Marcus stepped forward protectively. "The agents, are they all possessed?" Not all, James answered. Only those the collectors needed. The rest still think they're developing weapons to stop this. Eliza's equipment shrieked as the readings spiked. The distortions are accelerating, she warned. Reality itself is thinning around us. James nodded grimly. I felt it on my way here, roads looping, moments repeating. The walls between timelines are collapsing. He raised the tribal mask high. Its spirals shimmered with the same eerie blue as Sarah's aura. This artifact disrupts your tether to these vessels, he said to the assembled agents. One by one, I can force you back into your dimension. For the first time, Foster's stolen body stepped back an involuntary motion. The mask is a nuisance, she hissed. But the convergence cannot be stopped. Perhaps not, James admitted. But it can be guided. The child will be born. Its power will follow Thomas's design, not yours. He placed the mask on a small pedestal near the dais, aligning it to face the agents. Its spirals flared to life, casting a blue glow that shimmered across the chamber like ripples in deep water. Eleanor, Eliza, help, Sarah James instructed calmly. Marcus, activate the mirror array. Use the sequence from Thomas's journal. Marcus moved quickly, fingers flying over the hidden controls embedded in the chamber walls. The mirrors began to rotate, silver faces catching and amplifying the mask's glow. Suddenly, the possessed general lunged forward with inhuman speed. Enough delay. The vessel is ours now. The other agents surged forward, their movements a blur of unnatural precision. James raised both hands. The ore shimmered violently as though time itself had thickened. The agents froze mid-step, caught in a localized temporal snare. James's nose bled freely from the effort. Hurry, he gasped. I can't hold him long. Marcus twisted the final dial, but Eliza's face blanched as she read the display. James, these readings, they don't match Thomas's sequence. Something's wrong. Before she could react, James straightened. The exhaustion vanished from his eyes, replaced by a chilling calm. He wiped the blood from his face with deliberate precision. Of course they don't, he said, and now his voice carried the same harmonic distortion as the possessed agents. Because Thomas's plan was never meant to succeed. Alelana stepped back, horror dawning. James Blackwood is gone. The thing wearing his body replied coldly. He served his purpose, bringing the mask here, where it could be neutralized. With a sudden, effortless motion, he snatched the tribal mask from its pedestal and crushed it in his hands. The artifact shattered, scattering into a fine dark dust that evaporated in the charged air. The temporal snare collapsed. The frozen agents lurched back to life, surrounding the chamber in a tightening ring. You were possessed all along, Marcus whispered, dread sharpening his voice. Not possessed, James corrected, enlightened. The collector showed me the truth, the inevitability of convergence, the glorious destiny of the Blackwood bloodline. He turned to Sarah, his gaze now devoid of warmth. Our family was never meant to seal the barriers. We were meant to open them. The child will not save this world. It will unmake it. Sarah clenched her abdomen, another contraction racking her body. Thomas knew this might happen. She gasped, pain and resolve mixing in her voice. He prepared safeguards, in case one of us was turned. James laughed a sound that scraped the air like metal. Thomas was clever, but blind. He glimpsed the edges of true power and recoiled. I will not. At his gesture, 2 agents seized Marcus, while others closed in on Eliza and Elelanina. Take them to the transport, James ordered coolly. The pregnant one stays with me. You won't succeed. Elelanina spat, struggling against her captors. Success is irrelevant. James replied, eyes gleaming with alien certainty. The convergence is hours away. The child will be born into our custody, its power harvested to tear every barrier wide open. As Eleanor, Marcus, and Eliza were forced toward the stairs, James turned back to Sarah, his expression eerily serene. Your ancestors scattered the family across time, he said softly. Now at last, all threads are drawn together. The armored transport rumbled through the dark forest, its heavy tires crushing wet leaves and stones, as if the night itself were carrying them toward an ending long prepared. Inside the metal shell, Eleanor, Marcus, and Eliza sat shoulder to shoulder, wrists bound, their breath shallow in the chill air. 4 armed agents watched them in silence, eyes clouded with that unsettling milky glaze. Outside, the world blurred in a violet haze, the very edges of time already beginning to fray. 2 hours. Marcus whispered, the faint glow of his watch illuminating the fear in his eyes. 2 hours until the convergence peaks. If Sarah gives birth before we reach the chamber, we need to get back there. Eleanor interrupted softly, her voice barely more than a breath. Her fingers, quiet and patient, worked against the plastic ties binding her wrists, remembering every lesson Agent Foster had ever given her in those brief, uneasy training sessions. Eliza kept her gaze lowered, speaking so quietly that even the guards might not notice. Even if we escape, we're outnumbered. And James, whatever is wearing him, knows Thomas's fail-safes. Not all of them. Marcus replied, a glimmer of defiance in his eyes. Remember the tissue sample? The one that existed in quantum superposition? Eleanor's eyes flickered with sudden understanding. You copied the data. Marcus gave the smallest nod. Hidden in the lining of my shoe. A temporal disruptor. Thomas designed it as a last resort, a device to create a localized bubble of distorted time. Enough to confuse the collectors if only for a heartbeat. The transport jolted violently as it struck a deep pothole. For a single precious instant, the guards lost their balance. Eleanor moved like a coiled spring. The weakened zip tie snapped beneath her wrists. In a blur, she seized the nearest guard's weapon and fired into the vehicle's control panel. Sparks exploded in a shower of blue light. The engine shrieked metal, grinding as the transport swerved off the forest track and skidded to a dead halt. Chaos erupted. Eliza lunged for the emergency hatch while Marcus wrestled another guard to the floor. In the confusion, Eleanor kicked the door open and the 3 of them spilled into the cold night air. The forest welcomed them with a suffocating darkness. Behind them, shouts and gunfire echoed like the growl of some unseen beast. This way, Marcus hissed, leading them down a deer trail half hidden by mist. There's an equipment cache, Foster mentioned it once. Emergency supplies scattered throughout the perimeter. The moonless forest seemed to twist around them as they ran, branches clawing at their coats. At last, they found the bunker, a narrow steel hatch hidden beneath a carpet of wet leaves. Inside lay crates of weapons communications gear and scientific instruments. Thomas Blackwood's quiet insurance against the unimaginable. We build the disruptor. Now Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. She began unpacking wires and metal plates with quick, sure hands. Marcus, can you make it work with this? It won't be elegant, he replied grimly, but it will hold long enough. While Marcus and Eliza pieced the impossible machine together, Eleanor established a perimeter setting delicate sensors around the bunker's entrance. In the flickering lamplight, Eliza paused over a fragile component. Her brow furrowed. James spoke of the Blackwood bloodline as though we were meant to bring the convergence, not stop it. What if he wasn't entirely wrong? You think there's truth in that? Eleanor asked. I think Thomas played a game far older than any of us understand, Eliza murmured. He scattered the family across time, knowing we'd be drawn together again. But for what? To resist? Or to complete the circle? Marcus looked up from the tangle of circuitry. Maybe both. Maybe the convergence is inevitable. But the outcome he met, their eyes' voice trembling with an almost sacred weight, the outcome might still belong to the child. Remember Sarah's words. The child chooses its own path. Perhaps that was Thomas's hope all along. Before Eleanor could answer, a sharp chime broke the tense silence. The perimeter sensors flashed red. They found us, she warned. How much longer? Eliza asked, her voice tight. Done, Marcus said, lifting a small metal disc etched with impossible spirals. When I trigger this, it will create a bubble of desynchronized time. Everyone inside, including the collectors, will lose their bearings. They slipped into the deepening twilight, the disruptor cradled in Marcus's hands. Ahead, the Blackwood homestead rose from the mist like an apparition, its shape already warping under the strain of unraveling timelines. The sky above churned in unnatural hues, violet streaked with ribbons of moving shadow, as though the night itself were alive and watching. We need a diversion, Eleanor whispered, crouching behind a fallen tree. Dozens of possessed guards patrolled the perimeter, each moving with mechanical precision. The eastern side, Eliza pointed. Temporal distortions are strongest there. If we activate the disruptor, it might cascade through the house. Marcus nodded. I'll trigger it. You two reach Sarah. No, Eleanor said firmly. We move together, all or nothing. They synchronized their watches. Then, like phantoms, they slipped from the tree line, each heartbeat stretched by the unstable flow of time. Eleanor could feel it, pressing against her skin, moments lengthening, then collapsing, without warning. At the signal, Marcus activated the disruptor. The effect was immediate. Space itself rippled outward in a shimmering wave. The homestead convulsed as if struck by an unseen tide. Possessed guards staggered mid-step, their connection to the collectors, severed for the briefest instant. Eleanor darted through the confusion, Marcus and Eliza, close behind their breath, ragged as they crossed the trembling threshold. 5 minutes, Marcus warned, his voice nearly lost in the groaning of the walls. That's all the disruptor will buy us. They hurried to the old hearth and descended the hidden staircase, the air below pulsing with blue light. At the bottom, the convergence chamber glowed like the heart of some ancient machine. Sarah lay upon the raised dais, her face pale but resolute contractions racking her body in steady waves. Around her, the silver mirrors flickered between past and present, showing moments of 1847, 1947, and an unknowable future all at once. And there, collapsed beside the dais, lay James Blackwood. His body shivered as the disruptor tore at the entity within his once cold eyes, flickering with brief flashes of humanity. "Eleanor," Sarah gasped, reaching out a trembling hand as the chamber's light intensified. "You came back." The child was coming fast. Sarah's breathing deepened, her eyes half closed, yet glowing with a strange ancestral light that seemed older than the house itself. "What do we do?" Eleanor whispered, kneeling beside her. "Complete the circle," Sarah said, her voice carrying the echo of 100 forgotten ancestors. "Activate the mirrors, the true sequence, not the pattern James tried to force." Marcus moved at once, hands trembling but precise as he adjusted the great silver array. Eliza recalibrated the instruments, her brow damp with the effort. Eleanor braced Sarah through another fierce contraction, whispering soft words that were almost prayers. "They're coming back," Sarah warned, her gaze flicking toward the staircase above. "I can feel them regaining control." On the floor nearby, James stirred his eyes, flickering violently between human clarity and that awful milky haze as the possession fought to reclaim its vessel. "Hurry!" Eleanor urged, her voice low but urgent. "We're out of time." Only hours earlier, escape had seemed impossible. The armored transport had rumbled through the dark forest, carrying Eleanor, Marcus, and Eliza under heavy guard. 4 possessed agents sat across from them, weapons drawn, faces blank behind those identical pale eyes. 2 hours until the convergence peaks, Marcus had whispered, checking the faint glow of his watch. "If Sarah gives birth before we reach the chamber, we have to get back." Eleanor had breathed, her fingers working in tiny secret motions against the plastic zip ties binding her wrists. Each movement was a memory from Foster's training sessions, little tricks for desperate situations. Eliza had kept her eyes lowered, voice barely audible. "Even if we break free, we're outnumbered. And James, whatever he's become, knows every one of Thomas's fail-safes." "Not all of them," Marcus murmured. A small defiant spark lit his eyes. "Remember the tissue sample? The one locked in quantum superposition." Eleanor's breath caught. You copied the data." Marcus gave a tiny nod. "Hidden in the lining of my shoe. A temporal disruptor. Thomas designed it as a last resort, a way to bend time just long enough to confuse the collectors." As if fate answered his words, the transport jolted over a deep pothole. In that brief shudder of chaos, Eleanor struck. The weakened ties snapped. Her hand shot forward, wrenching the nearest guard's weapon and firing into the control panel. Sparks cascaded like cold fire. The vehicle screeched metal, grinding as it swerved violently and slammed to a halt. In the confusion, Eliza lunged for the emergency hatch while Marcus tackled another guard. Within moments, the 3 of them were free, plunging into the damp, whispering woods as gunfire cracked behind them. "This way," Marcus hissed, leading them through a maze of roots and fog. Foster mentioned an equipment cache. Supplies. Somewhere out here. They found it beneath a mat of dead leaves, a narrow steel hatch opening into a hidden bunker. Inside, weighted weapons, communication gear, and the scattered blueprints of Thomas Blackwood's impossible foresight. "We build the disruptor now," Eleanor said, already sorting through crates. "Can you make it work with this?" Eliza asked. "It won't be pretty," Marcus replied, "But it will hold." While Marcus soldered circuits with frantic precision, Eleanor set a perimeter of small blinking sensors. In the dim light, Eliza paused, voice soft but heavy. "James said the Blackwood bloodline was meant to facilitate the convergence, not stop it." What if he wasn't completely wrong? Eleanor frowned. "You think there's truth in that?" "I think Thomas played a game even we can't see," Eliza murmured. "He scattered the family across team, knowing we'd reunite. But was it to fight or to complete the circle?" Marcus looked up from the glowing wires. "Maybe both. Maybe convergence can't be avoided. But the outcome," he glanced toward them with a haunted calm, "the outcome might still belong to the child. Remember what Sarah said. The child chooses its own path. Maybe that's what Thomas trusted all along." A sudden alarm shattered the stillness. The perimeter sensors flashed crimson. "They've found us," Eleanor warned. "How much longer?" Eliza whispered. "Done," Marcus announced, holding up a small metal disc etched with spiraling circuits. When triggered, it creates a bubble of desynchronized time. Everyone inside will lose their bearings, even the collectors. They slipped into the violet twilight, moving like ghosts toward the Blackwood homestead. The house loomed ahead, its walls bending and trembling as if reality itself were breathing. Overhead, the sky churned with impossible colors, violet streaked with black ribbons that slithered like living things. "We need a diversion," Eleanor whispered as they crouched behind the tree line. Possessed guards patrolled the perimeter with mechanical precision. The eastern side, Eliza pointed. "Temporal distortions are strongest there. Activate the disruptor and the effect might cascade through the house." Marcus nodded grimly. "I'll trigger it. You two get to Sarah." "No," Eleanor said. We moved together. All or nothing. They synchronized their watches, then crept forward through the warping air. Time itself seemed to stretch and snap around them, moments elongating, then collapsing, without warning. At the signal, Marcus activated the disruptor. A ripple of distorted space-time exploded outward, washing over the homestead in a shimmering wave. Guards staggered mid-step, their alien connection severed for a fleeting heartbeat. Eleanor darted through the confusion, Marcus and Eliza at her heels, breath tearing in their throats. 5 minutes, Marcus warned. "That's all we have." They plunged through the old hearth and down the hidden stair into the convergence chamber, where past and future bled together. Silver mirrors spun slowly, reflecting not just their own faces, but countless echoes of the Blackwood line. Children, elders forgotten, generations flickering in and out like half-remembered dreams. Sarah lay on the central dais, laboring through another contraction. Her skin shimmered with waves of blue light, bending the air around her. Beside her, James lay unconscious. The disruptor's field holding the possession at bay for now. "Eleanor," Sarah gasped, clutching her hand. "The child comes quickly. Complete the circle." Marcus and Eliza worked furiously, aligning the mirrors into Thomas's hidden sequence. The air grew heavy, humming with the sound of collapsing time. Above them, the wooden staircase creaked, heavy footsteps returning as the possessed agents fought to reclaim the chamber. James twitched violently, his eyes flashing between human and otherworldly as the battle for his body resumed. "Almost there," Marcus called, his voice trembling as the final mirror locked into place. Around them, reality fractured like glass, each shard revealing a different moment in the endless Blackwood saga. And at the heart of it all, Sarah's child pressed closer to birth an answer, or perhaps a question that only time itself could decide. Thomas designed the sequence to create a single temporal focal point, channeling all the energy of the convergence into one decisive instant. Sarah screamed as the most powerful contraction yet seized her. The chamber trembled, dust raining from the cracked ceiling. In the mirrors surrounding them, the reflections shifted again. This time, the glass revealed the original Blackwood family of 1847 standing hand in hand, their mouths moving in silent unison. "They're here," Sarah gasped between contractions. "All of them." "Can you see?" At first, Elena saw only their own reflections. Then, like mist taking shape, translucent figures emerged, Blackwood descendants across generations, gathering across centuries to witness this single point in time. The possessed agents reached the bottom of the stairs, but halted as if striking an invisible wall, the convergence energy forming a shimmering barrier. "The child comes." Now, Sarah said suddenly, her voice harmonizing with an echo of Catherine Blackwood's across the chamber. "Be ready." Marcus completed the final adjustment to the mirrors just as Sarah's waters broke, glowing faintly as they spread across the dais in patterns identical to those in Thomas's journals. "Push, Elena," urged, bracing Sarah as another contraction racked her body. Sarah bore down with supernatural strength, her skin lit from within. Around them, the spectral Blackwoods solidified, forming a protective circle. With a final tremendous effort, Sarah brought forth the child, a girl who emerged silent and wide-eyed. Her irises shifting between blue and amber as she studied the world with impossible awareness. The instant the cord was cut, every mirror shattered at once. Prismatic light exploded across the chamber and gathered around the newborn, lifting her gently from Elena's arms. She floated in a nimbus of rippling time. "What's happening?" Eleanor whispered. "The convergence," Eliza breathed. "She exists in every timeline at once." The possessed agents broke through the barrier, James among them, his eyes now fully milk-white. "Stop them," he commanded, his voice warped by the thing controlling him. The child must not complete the sequence. Weapons lifted, but the spectral Blackwoods moved as one. Though insubstantial, their combined presence hardened into a wall of temporal force the agents could not breach. At the center of the circle, the infant began to change, not in flesh but in state. Her outline flickered through countless possibilities, leaving ghost images hanging in the air. Tiny fingers stretched outward and reality itself rippled. Windows opened in midair, literal tears in space-time. Through them, Elena glimpsed impossible vistas. The homestead in 1847, the valley, before human settlement, futures yet unborn, and geometries that bent the mind to look upon. "The barriers are fully breached," Marcus said, equal parts awe and terror. "She's creating gateways." Through the largest rift, something vast began to emerge. The true collectors, no longer needing human hosts, poured forward as writhing masses of limbs and sensory organs, arranged in patterns that defied natural law. Movements happened before they began. "They're coming through directly," Eliza warned. But the child turned her shifting gaze upon the intruders, and for the first time, Elena sensed fear from the unearthly shapes. With serene precision, the infant raised one tiny hand. The nearest collector recoiled, colliding with an unseen barrier. The child closed her fist. The rift snapped shut, trapping the creature between dimensions. A silent scream reverberated through the chamber as the thing was crushed into nothingness. One by one, the babies sealed each gateway. The possessed agents convulsed, dark vapor streaming from their eyes and mouths as their controlling entities were severed and dissipated into the void. She's doing exactly what Thomas designed her to do. Sarah whispered, tears of exhaustion and pride in her eyes. Not destroying the barriers, not opening them, becoming the gatekeeper. The spectral blackwoods began to fade as the convergence reached its zenith. For one perfect instant, all generations coexisted, united across centuries. Thomas Blackwood himself appeared among them, his translucent form solemn and calm. He reached out to touch the child's brow in blessing, then turned to the living. Though no sound escaped, Elena read his lips with perfect clarity. The circle is complete. The anchor is set. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the Blackwood homestead, now whole, stable and quiet. Birds sang as if nothing impossible had just unfolded. In the main room, Elena sat with Sarah, who cradled her newborn. The infant's eyes still flickered between blue and amber, but her form had settled into a single state. "We've named her Catherine," Sarah said softly. After her ancestor, Elena smiled, letting the baby's tiny fingers wrap around her own. "She looks perfectly normal." On the surface, Sarah agreed. But she will always be the anchor, the one being who exists at every point in the Blackwood timeline. Marcus emerged from the hidden chamber below Eliza, close behind. "The temporal anchor is stable," Marcus reported. "Thomas's design worked. The barriers hold, but controlled connections remain, like a valve instead of a wall. The collectors can never force their way through again," Eliza added. "But if Catherine wills it, she can open a path." James stirred on a nearby cot, his eyes now clear and human. "I remember everything," he said hoarsely. "The entity amplified my own doubts, made me believe resistance was futile." "It wasn't you," Elena assured him. "Part of it was," he admitted. His gaze softened on the infant. "But now I understand what Thomas knew. The convergence wasn't to be prevented. It was to be guided." Outside government vehicles rolled up the drive, the real agency this time. Agent Foster emerged alive, but dazed, with no memory of her time under possession. "What will you tell them?" Sarah asked. "As little as possible," Elena replied. "Some truths are too dangerous even for allies." Through the windows, the last spectral figures of the Blackwood line faded into their rightful eras, carrying with them the memory of this night. "They're all connected now," Sarah said, rocking her child. "Every generation will remember. Every sacrifice had purpose." Marcus looked at the dawn sky and then at the newborn who had sealed worlds. "Thomas built the framework," he said quietly. "But Catherine made the choice." Elena met Sarah's tired but triumphant eyes. "And because of that choice," she whispered, "the circle finally holds." The official story is a gas leak and a case of mass hallucination, Agent Foster said briskly as they regrouped near the waiting convoy. "My superiors are eager to bury this incident entirely." And unofficially, Elena asked, Foster's expression softened a flicker of humanity, breaking through the agent's practiced neutrality. Unofficially, I remember fragments of what happened while I was not myself. Enough to know some secrets should remain exactly that. The team exchanged a silent understanding. No one argued. As they prepared to depart, Elelanina turned for one last look at the Blackwood homestead. For a heartbeat, she swore she saw Thomas and Catherine Blackwood standing on the porch. Their spectral children gathered around them, watching with quiet satisfaction as their descendants carried the legacy forward. Then the figures faded into the brightening morning. "What happens now?" Eliza asked as the SUV rolled down the gravel drive. "We document everything," Elelanena said firmly. "Preserve the knowledge but protect it from anyone who might misuse it." And Catherine Marcus glanced toward the infant in Sarah's arms. Sarah smiled faintly, her eyes glowing with both pride and exhaustion. She'll grow up knowing her heritage, understanding her role as guardian of the barriers, and when the time comes, she'll learn to use her abilities consciously. James stared out the window, watching the landscape blur past. His voice was quiet but certain. The Blackwood bloodline will continue connected across time by shared memory and purpose, protected from those who would exploit it. The vehicle crested a hill. Dawn spilled across the valley below, bathing the fields in gold. For a fleeting moment, Elelanena saw faint ripples shimmer across the horizon. Temporal echoes where past, present, and future overlapped before settling back into perfect alignment. Sarah noticed them too. "The barriers are healing," she murmured, "becoming stable again." Baby Catherine yawned and closed her shifting eyes, a child of many times, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, a living culmination of a plan nearly 2 centuries in the making. "Not the end," Elelanena whispered, studying the infant's serene face. "Just another convergence point in an endless cycle." But this time, Marcus added with quiet certainty, "Watching the first rays of sun pierce the mist, we've changed the rules of the game."